Do giants really exist? Then how do we explain the hundreds of forgotten photographs from the 1850s to the early 90s that show men and women of impossible height? From America to Asia, long-forgotten archives hold images that refuse to fit comfortably into the history we've come to accept. Towering figures stand beside ordinary people, government buildings, construction sites, and massive entrances that seem perfectly scaled to their size. In this video, we're going to take a look at photographs, museum collections, and newspaper reports from the 19th century that reveal a series of striking similarities. We'll also explore the Guardian theory, the connection many believe existed between these giants and Tartaria's extraordinary architecture, and the clues that may still survive in thousands of forgotten photographs and historic structures. So, were they simply forgotten anomalies, or could they have belonged to something much larger? Chapter 1. Giant Architecture and the Tartaria Connection. Well, when we started our research on this topic, we expected the story to revolve around architecture rather than people. Old government buildings from the 18th and 19th centuries kept raising the same questions. Many featured interior doorways reaching 12 to 15 feet in height, staircases with unusually high steps, oversized windows, and ceilings that seemed excessive for ordinary administrative offices. Architects often explain these features as symbols of prestige, wealth, or authority, especially during the Georgian, neoclassical, and Beaux Arts periods. That explanation certainly accounts for some structures. Even so, the same design choices appear so frequently that many independent researchers believe another possibility deserves a closer look. Everything changed when the photographs entered the picture. Albumen prints, carte de visite, cabinet cards, and tintypes from the mid-1800s through the closing years of the 19th century began showing remarkably tall men and, in several cases, women standing beside people of ordinary height. According to supporters of the giant theory, many of these photos were never presented as circus advertisements or promotional material for traveling performers. Instead, the individuals appeared in formal portraits, family gatherings, civic events, and official settings, dressed no differently from everyone around them. Several collections frequently appear in discussions surrounding these images. References often point toward photos preserved within the British Museum, the Smithsonian Institution, the Library of Congress, and archives throughout France and Russia. While mainstream historians generally attribute such cases to uncommon medical conditions, photographic perspective, or incomplete documentation, supporters argue those explanations fail to address the remarkable number of similar images spread across different countries during roughly the same 50-year period. Another detail becomes difficult to overlook. Many of those towering individuals were photographed beside substantial public buildings rather than private homes. Courthouses, railway stations, municipal offices, military facilities, and administrative headquarters appear repeatedly throughout the surviving collection. Their surroundings often display unusually tall entrances, broad corridors, super-expansive staircases, and large interior spaces that seem almost perfectly suited to someone far taller than the average 19th century citizen. Examples regularly mentioned include administrative buildings in St. Petersburg, government complexes throughout British India, civic structures in Buenos Aires, and numerous courthouses across the U.S. built during the 18th and 19th centuries. Historians generally regard these features as expressions of monumental architecture, but supporters of the theory suggest the buildings may have served another practical purpose altogether. That suggestion eventually leads toward one of the most debated subjects connected to this mystery: Tartaria. Well, the name itself is not a modern invention. European maps published between the 16th and early 19th centuries frequently label an enormous portion of northern and central Asia as Great Tartary or simply Tartary. Cartographers such as Abraham Ortelius, Gerardus Mercator, Willem Bleu, and later editions of the Encyclopedia Britannica all use the term while describing lands stretching across Siberia and beyond. Modern historians explain that Tartary was never the name of a single empire. Instead, it served as a broad geographical label applied by European mapmakers to territories that remained poorly understood at the time. Supporters of the Tartaria theory see those same maps very differently. According to their interpretation, the word referred to a highly organized civilization whose history gradually disappeared during the 19th century. They argue that many surviving government buildings, exhibition halls, railway stations, cathedrals, and administrative centers did not originate with the nations that later occupied them. Instead, those structures are presented as remnants of a much older society whose achievements were eventually attributed to more familiar empires. Whether that interpretation withstands historical scrutiny remains the subject of intense debate, yet it introduces another question that keeps returning throughout this investigation. Why do so many monumental buildings from the 18th and 19th centuries appear consistent despite being separated by thousands of miles? The Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, the Palace of Justice in Brussels, the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., the Royal Exhibition Building in Melbourne, Government House in Kolkata, and numerous civic buildings throughout Europe and South America all display soaring entrances, immense halls, enormous columns, and proportions that continue to attract attention. Architectural historians generally credit advances in engineering, improved stone construction, iron framing, and the desire of governments to project permanence and authority. Those explanations are supported by extensive historical records. Even so, advocates of the giant theory believe another possibility deserves consideration. They point toward photographs showing exceptionally tall individuals standing in front of similar buildings and suggest the relationship is more than coincidence. According to that view, those men and women occupied positions as guards, supervisors, administrators, engineers, or ceremonial officials rather than existing on the edges of society. Their remarkable height, supporters argue, would naturally complement buildings designed on a larger scale. The timeline becomes another reason the theory continues attracting attention. Many of the photographs most frequently discussed appear between the 1850s and the closing years of the 19th century. By the early decades of the 20th century, similar images become noticeably less common. Around that same period, the geographical label Tartary largely disappears from newly published maps as Russia consolidated control across Siberia and Central Asia, replacing older regional terminology with modern political boundaries. Historians consider that transition a normal consequence of changing geography and expanding knowledge. Advocates of the alternative theory see the same sequence as something far more significant. That contrast lies at the heart of this mystery. On one side stand documented historical explanations supported by surviving records, architectural studies, and established scholarship. On the other are photographs, forgotten reports, oversized public buildings, and a growing collection of unanswered questions that continue fueling debate among independent researchers. Whether those scattered pieces represent a coincidence or fragments of a much larger story remains for each viewer to decide. Our task is not to settle the argument, but to examine the evidence, compare competing explanations, and follow the trail wherever it leads next. Chapter 2. Giant skeletons and the vanishing evidence that brings us to another piece of the puzzle, one that has fueled debate for well over a century. If a civilization truly vanished from history, according to supporters of the Tartaria theory, what would become of the physical evidence left behind? Their answer is simple. The first things to disappear would not be buildings made of stone. They would be the remains of the people themselves. During the 19th century and the early years of the 20th, newspapers throughout the United States frequently published reports describing unusually large human skeletons uncovered during excavations. Railroad construction, farming, road projects, and the opening of Native American burial mounds regularly produced headlines that attracted public attention. Articles from publications such as the New York Times, the San Diego Union, and numerous regional newspapers described discoveries that ranged from remarkably tall individuals to skeletons claimed to measure well beyond ordinary human height. Those reports still exist in newspaper archives today, although historians caution that 19th-century journalism often mixed verified discoveries with exaggeration, incomplete information, and local folklore. Even so, supporters of the theory believe the sheer number of similar reports deserves careful examination rather than immediate dismissal. Many of those articles mention burial sites containing large remains alongside stone tools, copper objects, pottery, or other archaeological material. Some accounts describe carefully arranged graves instead of isolated burials, leading independent researchers to argue that these individuals belong to established communities rather than representing rare biological exceptions. Archaeologists generally interpret those discoveries differently, explaining that many early newspaper reports relied on second-hand accounts, inaccurate measurements, or misunderstandings before professional excavations became standard practice. Another point continues drawing attention. According to numerous claims repeated for decades, several of those skeletal remains were reportedly transferred to museums or scientific institutions for further study, including the Smithsonian Institution. Supporters argue that many specimens later disappeared from public discussion, giving rise to allegations that important evidence was intentionally removed. The Smithsonian has repeatedly denied possessing collections of giant human skeletons or participating in any effort to conceal such discoveries, and no verified evidence has established the existence of a coordinated cover-up. Even so, the absence of confirmed specimens continues to fuel speculation among researchers who question the official explanation. Looking only at one report proves very little. Looking at hundreds published over several decades naturally encourages more questions. The timeline itself remains one of the most discussed parts of the mystery. Many of the reports cited by independent researchers appeared between the 1870s and the early decades of the 20th century. Around the same period, photographs of exceptionally tall individuals also became increasingly rare, while the geographical label Tartary gradually disappeared from newly printed maps as modern political boundaries replaced older regional names. Historians regard those developments as unrelated historical events. Advocates of the alternative theory believe the overlap is too remarkable to dismiss as coincidence. That difference in interpretation sits at the center of this entire discussion. Were 19th-century newspapers simply reflecting the less rigorous reporting standards of their era? Were unusually tall skeletons the result of inaccurate measurements or misunderstood archaeological discoveries? Or do those forgotten articles preserve fragments of a larger story that has never been fully explained? Chapter 3. Were giants the builders and administrators? Now, let us ask you another question. According to supporters of this theory, what if these tall individuals were never meant to be kings or conquerors? What if their place within society was far more practical? Some researchers suggest they may have served as guardians, supervisors, engineers, or administrators responsible for maintaining important public works rather than ruling over ordinary citizens. That possibility changes the way certain details are interpreted. Instead of viewing oversized government buildings, courthouses, administrative offices, and monumental public halls as nothing more than grand architectural statements, supporters argue they may have been designed around the people expected to work inside them every day. They also point toward the photographs discussed earlier, noting that many of the towering figures appear in formal civic settings instead of marketplaces, private homes, or ordinary neighborhoods. Whether that observation carries historical significance remains open to debate, yet it continues attracting attention. The same idea is often extended to construction itself. Throughout Europe, Russia, Asia, and the Americas, remarkable stone buildings completed during the 18th and 19th centuries still inspire admiration for their precision and scale. Mainstream historians credit skilled architects, experienced stonemasons, advancing engineering methods, and thousands of laborers working over many years. Supporters of the alternative theory offer a different interpretation. They suggest those projects may have relied on a specialized group whose physical stature made demanding construction work more manageable than it appears today. That leads to the final question, raised by this theory. If later societies inherited monumental structures whose original purpose had already been forgotten, would every chapter of their story survive unchanged? Historians answer that surviving records provide strong evidence for how these buildings were planned and constructed. Others remain unconvinced, believing gaps in the historical record leave room for further investigation. Whether one accepts the conventional explanation or the alternative interpretation, the photographs, architecture, and newspaper accounts continue encouraging the same response, to keep asking questions before deciding where the evidence truly leads. Chapter 4. The alleged historical cover-up following the photographs, architectural designs, historical maps, and newspaper reports eventually leads to another question, one that supporters of this theory consider even more important than the discoveries themselves. If these pieces genuinely point toward a forgotten chapter of history, why has so little serious attention been given to bringing them together? According to many independent researchers, the mystery is not defined by a single missing photograph or one disputed excavation. Instead, they believe the real puzzle lies in how often each subject is examined separately while rarely being discussed as part of a larger picture. Mainstream historians offer understandable reasons for that approach. Architectural historians study buildings. Archaeologists examine excavations. Cartographers research historical maps. Medical experts investigate unusual skeletal remains. Each discipline follows its own methods and standards. Even so, supporters of the alternative interpretation argue that separating every subject into its own category prevents broader connections from ever being explored. That concern appears repeatedly throughout discussions surrounding Tartaria and the giant hypothesis. Photographs are commonly explained as perspective, medical conditions, camera angles, or incomplete documentation. Reports describing unusually large skeletons are frequently attributed to inaccurate newspaper reporting, exaggerated measurements, or 19th century sensationalism. Monumental public buildings are interpreted as expressions of political authority, wealth, and architectural fashion. Historic maps showing the name Tartary are regarded as geographical terminology reflecting European knowledge of Asia before modern borders became established. Each explanation may appear reasonable when viewed on its own. Supporters of the theory believe the pattern changes once every piece is placed beside the next. They argue that tall individuals, oversized public architecture, forgotten newspaper reports, and the gradual disappearance of the name Tartary from later maps all seem concentrated within roughly the same historical period. Whether that overlap represents coincidence or something more meaningful remains the central point of disagreement. Perhaps that is why the conversation continues generation after generation. Not because definitive proof has settled the debate, but because neither side has completely persuaded the other. Established scholarship points toward documented records, engineering history, and archaeological evidence supporting conventional explanations. Independent researchers continue asking whether overlooked details deserve another look before every question is considered resolved. Whatever conclusion ultimately proves correct, one fact remains undeniable. Those remarkable photographs still exist. Old maps carrying the name Tartary can still be examined today. None of those sources disappeared. The disagreement begins only when people attempt to explain what they mean together. Perhaps they describe nothing more than unrelated fragments connected through coincidence. Or perhaps they preserve traces of a story that has not yet been fully understood. That decision belongs to every viewer willing to examine the material, compare competing explanations, and decide which interpretation best fits the evidence currently available. Chapter 5. So, what really happened to the giants? That brings us to the question every part of this investigation has been building toward. Who were the impossibly tall individuals appearing in 19th century photographs, newspaper reports, and historical discussions? According to supporters of the Tartaria theory, they were not isolated medical cases appearing by chance. They believe those individuals occupied meaningful roles within a society that gradually disappeared from the historical narrative, leaving behind monumental buildings while much of its story slowly faded from public memory. Established historians strongly disagree with that conclusion. They point toward documented architecture, engineering records, archaeology, and medical science as providing conventional explanations for each subject discussed throughout this documentary. Independent researchers remain unconvinced, arguing that too many unanswered questions continue appearing whenever photographs, historic maps, oversized public buildings, newspaper reports, and disputed discoveries are examined together instead of separately. Perhaps that disagreement explains why interest in this subject continues growing. Every newly discovered photograph, forgotten newspaper clipping, antique map, or unusual architectural feature encourages another round of discussion. One side sees coincidence supported by incomplete 19th century reporting. The other sees pieces of a forgotten chapter that has never received the attention it deserves. Neither interpretation has ended the conversation. Well, whatever conclusion each viewer ultimately reaches, the questions themselves remain surprisingly persistent. Why did reports describing tall individuals become less common during the 20th century? Why do monumental public buildings continue inspiring debate about their original purpose? Why do historical maps carrying the name Tartary still attract so much curiosity centuries after they were printed? Most importantly, why do these separate subjects continue leading people back toward the same collection of photographs, documents, and buildings? Maybe every answer already exists within conventional history. Or maybe some chapters remain incomplete, waiting for additional evidence that has yet to surface. Until then, the discussion remains open. The photographs continue inviting closer examination, and the remarkable buildings still stand exactly where they always have, allowing every generation to decide for itself whether they are simply extraordinary achievements of the past or silent witnesses to a story that has not yet been fully explained. What do you think about Tartaria giants? Well, drop your comments below. And be sure to give this video a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you very soon.